wearables are kind of opening some new doors for how we interact with between clouds and our human being. The watches that are coming out, the other devices like Google Glass and those sorts of things are really creating these new interaction models that we have between our human bodies and the clouds out there. So what what I'm going to be talking about is what Salesforce has done around integrating clouds and humans. And what we did last week, as I mentioned, was we had a huge launch around Salesforce wearables. And so what that was 6 different open source wearable developer packs for Google Glass, Android Wear, the Samsung Gear, the Pebble, and a number of others. And we created these developer packs to help developers actually start building wearable applications that connect the Salesforce cloud to the wearable devices. So so the wearable packs, they're available at developer.salesforce.com/wear, and there's a few different components to the wearable packs. There's a sample application for each wearable pack. There's instructions on how to get it set up and running in your own development environment, and then kind of an architectural guide, like here's how the app is architected, here's the pieces that you want to do. So the one that I worked on was the Android Wear one. So I worked on the Android Wear wearable pack for Salesforce, and you can find out more about that at developer.android.com/wear. But let me give you a little bit of background on the Android Wear pack. Before I do that, we're going to go about a half an hour, and I'm guarding the food. So the only way you can get food is if you ask questions, and then you can come up and get some food. Same with beer too. So you have to ask questions as I go. So any questions so far? Okay. All right. So Android Wear. It's the model for Android Wear is that your smart watch or your Android wearable device is really a companion to a smartphone. So they coexist together, they work together, and so there's a different interaction model around Android Wear than around a smartphone. Even though they work together, the interaction model is that you want these things to be glanceable. You want the user to be able to glance down, see a little bit of information, and then be able to quickly take actions on that information. And so the way that it actually works is that you have the Android phone, and it pushes notifications to a watch, per se, and then on the watch, the user can then take actions that actually do something on the phone. And so obviously the app on the phone can do whatever it wants. So that's the interaction model. It's pretty basic. There's, at least in Android Wear, as far as I know today, there's not an idea of like an app on a watch. They don't really support that. Even though it is really Android underneath the watch, they don't really support the idea of the user actually installing apps on their watch. Instead, the user has apps on their phone, and those apps can then connect to and communicate with the watch through notifications and through interactions. So there's 2 devices that I know of that are Android Wear devices. Moto 360, it's actually a really good looking watch. It's one that I would actually probably wear. Most of the other smartwatches, I'm just like, I don't really want that on my arm. But the Moto 360 one, that's this one. Check it out. Go to like moto360.motorola.com. You can see some nice pictures of it. So that one, we know that's coming probably this summer. And then there's another one that just got rumored to be coming this summer. It's the LGG. It also looks pretty nice. Interesting thing is they have different format displays. The LGG has a rectangular display, and the Moto 360 has a circular display. But so what's interesting about this, and kind of confirms this a bit, is that in the Android Wear developer tools, you can pick from either a circular emulator or a rectangular emulator. So I don't actually have one of these watches yet. It's kind of sad. I had to use the emulator to build this app. But nobody actually really has these devices yet, other than I think Google and Motorola. They offered to allow us to come into their lab after signing 3 NDAs, and we could test our app on a watch, but we couldn't actually leave with one, which I wanted to challenge. Be like, oh, I don't know where it went. Take some magic courses and then walk out with a watch or something. But Anyways, so I don't actually have a watch yet, so we're going to be checking out some stuff on the emulator. So that's your quick intro to Android Wear. The developer tools are all available today. That's what we built this stuff on for the Android Wear developer pack. Questions about Android Wear? Yeah, go ahead.
Could you just tell us, so you said there's multiple notifications and interactions. What's the kind of scope of things that you can do?
So, yeah, so the question was, what's the scope of things you can do in the UI? So it appears that from my experience with the SDK, you have very little freedom over what you can actually do in the display and in the interactions. That there's a very set number of things that you can display, ways that you can display data, and ways that you can interact with data. It's a very specific interaction model. But I've heard that next week at Google I/O that some of that may be changing. So we'll see what happens next week. But or at least right now in what I built, there was very tight constraints around the interaction model that I could build. Yeah.
Question about devices is still manufacturer proprietary. Is that how they're playing?
Yeah, good question. So the question is, what's the connection between the actual network connection between the phone and the watch? And I don't actually know that yet, because the way that you connect the Android Wear emulator to a physical Android phone is through TCP, but they don't really specify in the real world if it's going to be Bluetooth, if it's going to be Wi-Fi, if it's going to be something else. So I haven't seen any information about the actual physical connection. I've heard that they will use it's like low power Bluetooth or low something Bluetooth. I've heard that that's what they'll use, but I haven't confirmed that myself because the SDK doesn't expose the actual communication API at all. So, yeah, other questions about Android Wear? Okay, so that's your quick little intro to Android Wear. So in the Android Wear developer pack that I built, the use case that I created was I wanted it to be kind of real world, and so what we thought of was, all right, you're a sales manager and you're using Salesforce and you're out on a bike ride, and one of your sales guys creates a quote, a price quote on an opportunity, and the discount level is above some threshold. You want to create an approval workflow, and then the sales manager on their bike ride wants to be able to glance down at their watch, quickly review this quote, and then either approve or reject that quote, or possibly open that quote up on their phone to get more information about it and then take action. So those were the three actions. So the way that this works, the way that I set up this app, that's weird, a little lag there. So the way that I set up this app was that a user in Salesforce, a sales rep in Salesforce, they create a new quote, and that quote has a discount at 20% or greater. And
No, but you have something else. Oh, now we can see it.
oh, now it's on my camera.
We can see it now.
Yeah. Okay. Just got a little behind, I guess. Cool. Okay. So the sales rep creates a new quote with a discount at 20 or higher percent, and then what that does is it calls a trigger in Salesforce, which calls a new API that'll be released in Salesforce summer 2014, and that API does a mobile push notification to the Google Cloud messaging service, which can deliver a message to a mobile device, so push a message to a mobile device. And so the mobile device that it pushes it to is my Android smartphone, and then my Android smartphone pushes a notification to the watch, and then I can see the information about the quote, review, and then take my action. So that's the quote discount approval app. That's a sample app that comes with the mobile the build pack. Or sorry, not the build pack. The wearable pack for Android Wear. Salesforce wearable pack for Android Wear. So questions about the use case that we built, how we built it. Okay, so that's the general architecture. So I'm gonna sit down now because I want to actually walk through some of the sort. Oh, I'm gonna do a demo first, and then we'll walk through some of the code for how this thing actually works. So first, let's pull up the emulator. So here's my Android Wear emulator. In a second. Latency, it's so much fun. So what you will see is the Android Wear. There it is. We just got a few seconds delay. So that's the Android Wear emulator. So this is my watch. So I'm logged into the emulator as Sal. Sal is the sales manager. If I go over to Salesforce, I'm logged into Salesforce as John. So John is the sales guy. So I'm going to, as John, now go in here, and I'm going to go into the opportunity, the big widget deal opportunity, and then I'm going to go create a new quote on this opportunity, and we'll call this foo. I'm really creative with my naming, so everything is like foo or bar. That's only the two names that I use. And then I'm going to add a new line item to this quote. We'll use the standard price book. I'm going to select this Gen Watt diesel thingy. And now I can specify the quantity and the discount amount. So when I hit save, that's now going to call a trigger. It's going to create an approval workflow for my application. And we can scroll down here and we can see that, all right, there's an approval workflow and I'm pending Sal's approval. So that's what that looks like. So now you'll see that I already received the notification. So this notification on the wearable, on Sal's watch, actually came from Salesforce to this phone here and then pushed to the watch, to the, in this case, the emulator. So now Sal can pull up the actual quote and see that, all right, John Doe, that looks familiar, right? This guy back there, that's his picture. And so he can go review the quote, see, all right, it's a discount of 30%, total price is $70,000, and then he can either approve, reject, or open on the phone. And so Sal says, hey, 30%, no way, that's just too high. So now Sal rejects that quote. And so if we go back to Salesforce, and if everything worked okay, then we refresh the page and we see that, all right, Sal has rejected this, it's too high to reject it there. So now you can see this round trip workflow there with Salesforce. So that's a little demo for the wearables. Questions about that? Yeah.
You mentioned a trigger. You had to write a custom trigger for this. It's not just the standard quote.
So it's the standard quote function, the standard workflow. Yeah, so it will send a notification out to Salesforce 1. And on my phone, I actually had to disable notifications from Salesforce 1 or else I'd get 2. The difference is that this now, the UI here is catered towards quote approvals. So there's approve, reject, and open. And in the standard notification, there's not open, and it's not, the notification is not wearable enabled. So there's specific things you have to do in the native Android app to make it work correctly on the wearable device. And Salesforce 1 doesn't do all those things yet. I'm sure that in the future they will do all the right things to be wearable friendly in Salesforce 1. And so it'd be great if this kind of stuff was just built directly into Salesforce 1 and we wouldn't have to have another app to do this particular use case, right? There's other use cases I'm sure we could think of that Salesforce 1's not going to address, but you're absolutely right that this particular use case is something that Salesforce 1 should just do correctly out of the box.
I'm not even making that assertion. I just want to clarify.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification.
You can't do everything you want.
Yeah. So this, so there hasn't been a wearable compatible Salesforce 1 app release yet. Okay, other questions about this little sample app? Okay, so I wanted to spend a little bit of time in the code to give you an idea for how this all came together and what's actually in the Wear pack. So I'm going to use, I'm using IntelliJ as my code editor. So where I'm going to start, this is the quote discount approval sample app that's part of the Wearable Android Wear developer pack. And I'm going to start with the build. So this is a native Android app. Native Android apps use Gradle as their build tool. So there were some things that I did to try to make this real developer friendly. So one of the things that I did was I actually created a little Force Gradle plugin, and this makes it real easy for a developer to have the Salesforce Apex code and configuration that's going to be used, have that in the project, and then synchronize that up to Salesforce. So we'll take a look at that in a second. So there's a few other little things. Most of that doesn't matter. I'm using the Salesforce SDK as a dependency. That's the Android Salesforce, the Android SDK for Salesforce. And then I've got this wearable preview thing. Okay, so that's my build. Pretty simple build there. So this is going to build the Android app, and it's going to allow me to take the Salesforce code that I have in this project and publish it up to my Salesforce instance. So let me show you my Salesforce code. So in source main Salesforce, that's a very Maven or Gradle convention. I have a bunch of code and configuration that's going to get packaged up and then deployed onto my Oregon Salesforce. So things like an approval process. This is my XML definition of the approval process that I set up. So really the reason why I set all this up is because I wanted the developer just to be able to type one command, which is like Gradle deploy sales or deploy force metadata, I think is what it is. That takes all this Salesforce stuff and deploys it onto Salesforce. So this is the XML definition of the approval process that says that when the quote discount is 20% or more, then go through this approval process, and the approver is the person's manager. So we can see that there. That's could also be created by doing a metadata retrieve from Salesforce is where I actually got that from. I didn't write that by hand. Okay, then I have what is that? I don't. Oh, that's like. Oh, I know what this is for. Doesn't really matter, but this is not an actual test. It's a way that from you know how in the new developer console you can just execute arbitrary Apex code. So, yeah, so I created this little helper function that allows me to test a push notification, because I actually had some significant problems getting push notifications to work. It turned out it was an Android bug, but it was really, really painful, and so I needed a way to debug that. So that's what that is for, is debugging the actual push notifications. Okay, then I've got you can actually create a connected app in configuration, so that does that for you. Then quote settings enables quotes because they're not enabled by default, so that enables quotes on opportunities. Okay, now the more exciting part is the actual trigger. So the trigger is what's going to now check to see, do we need to start the approval process, and do we need to send a notification out to the mobile device? So so here is where I check to see, all right, is the discount greater than or equal to 20? Great, then let's create a new approval process, and then we're going to create a new messaging.push notification. So this is a new API that'll be in summer 14, and this is the mobile push notification interface. So what I'm doing is I'm taking a bunch of data, populating it into this push notification, and then setting the payload, specifying who I want to receive this notification. So in this case, I want the manager to receive the notification, which is identified by the process. We scroll back up here. This is the process result, blah, blah, blah. Actor ID 0 is the manager, right? A little bit of hacky code here. But then the key is that now I say message.send, and that's what actually does the push notification to the Google Cloud messaging service, which then delivers the message to my mobile phone. So that's my trigger. That's kind of the guts of a lot of the logic on Salesforce. Okay, so questions about the Salesforce side of things. Yeah.
So it looks like you have this trigger, the API call that is coming, right? And so it does the API call, but so the logistics around that is it will only push to the devices that that user is logged into.
Yep.
Okay?
Yeah.
So it's targeted.
Yeah. To restate that, so it only pushed to the device that this user, in this case Sal, it only pushed to the devices that Sal is logged into. Sorry.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's good. But then when you do that, how does it know the context of the record? You said when it pushed it, you said approve, reject, and open. Yeah. So is there magic happening based upon?
So I'm just taking all the information that I need to know about the quote and I'm putting it into the payload, and then that comes down into the Android app. So when we look at the Android app, you'll see where I deconstruct this payload into something that I use on the Android side. But all that information about how I approve, reject, and open, all that information, and then everything I display in the notification, all of it is contained in here. I could have made it a lot more lightweight where I just passed like one idea of like the approval process, and then in the Android app, I then use an API to get everything that I need on the Android side. But I said, hey, let's just pass it all down in the notification, and I don't know if there's a limit on how. I'm sure there's a limit, a pretty small limit on how big your notifications can be. So maybe a better strategy would be to keep this like, I could have just kept this the approval process ID, only sent that, and then I could have determined everything else from that by making API calls from the Android app. But in this case, I just shoved it all in the message. That's good. Okay. Other questions about the trigger or about any of the Apex code? About my Gradle deployment thing that I built. If you're ever building Gradle apps, then check out the Force Gradle plugin. So there's Gradle. You can run Gradle deploy metadata, which takes everything in source, main, Salesforce, and deploys it to Salesforce. Or you can do Gradle fetch metadata, fetch force metadata, and that fetches whatever metadata you specify in the build.gradle. So down here you'll see in the build.gradle I specified some things to fetch. So that fetches all of that metadata and copies it into my source main Salesforce directory. So that's that Gradle plugin. Okay, so that's the Salesforce side. Let me show you a little bit of the Android side, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so first, let me show you the main app. The main app is like the main entry point for this application, this Android application. So there is a native Android app. You probably can't see it, but I have a good way to show you on my phone. So this is actually a native Android app. I can run this app on my phone. So there is actually an app that looks like this, and that app is what's doing the receiving the push notifications and talking to the wearable.
Runs in the background?
It does, yeah. I didn't set it up to auto start when the phone starts, but I think I could have. But right now, yeah, it runs in the background, so it doesn't matter if the app's open or not. It's going to receive the notifications and handle them.
You need the service to run.
Yeah, so you have to have the service running on the phone in order to get the notification out to the watch. Yeah. Okay, so this is the kind of entry point to my Android application. What I'm doing is I'm initializing blah blah blah. But then here's the key part is I'm actually just using the Salesforce Android SDK, and I'm setting up a push notification receiver. So the push notification receiver is the thing that actually handles all of the handling of the push message for me. So it's a really nice little feature in that SDK is that they already can handle the push notifications. So in this case, the handler is this quote push notification. So this is this on push message received, and this is Java code for native Android. And this is now taking the bundle, which is the data that I received in the message, and it's kind of assembling it into a quote message object. Here's where I'm doing all the mapping of that data that I received, blah, blah, blah. So that's a little value object there. And then then it starts to get a little nasty. The reason is that my requirements dictated to me by product management were that I displayed the requester's photo in the background on the watch, which I think you saw that part. And that gets a little tricky on Android because doing that, you have to do it asynchronously because you can't block like the main thread. And so it got a little interesting to do that part asynchronously, so you can see where I'm actually going out and fetching the user's photo. So that wasn't fake. That was legitimate. Which normally I would just be like, oh, let's just fake it. I'll just hard code my picture, but I wanted this to be real. So okay, then we get into the more interesting part. So this is kind of what happens once we've received that bitmap to see that, hey, maybe we have a chatter profile picture, right? So then I start assembling the notification. So there's a few different actions that can happen: open, approve, reject, right? And then I create the main notifications. This is all just like Android API stuff to assemble the notification with all the different pieces that you saw displayed on the wearable emulator. Then there's some wearable specific stuff that happens down here. So that's using this new wearable API, Android API. And then finally, you'll see the important part where I actually do the notification. I actually send the notification, and that then sends to the wearable device. So then when that pops up the notification on the actual device, let me show you the last part of this, which is the actions that the user can take. So when the user, I've set up these, they call them intents on Android. It's basically like something that should happen when the user takes some action. And so, so what I'm doing is I'm saying, all right, when the user does an open or approve or reject, then do these things. So on open, interestingly, so if you click open on the watch, it opens in Salesforce 1. And interestingly, the way to open something on Salesforce 1 is you start this new activity, which is to navigate to chatter : / and then some ID. It could be any ID, and the Salesforce 1 app will figure that out.
Is that true for iOS?
I don't know about iOS. That's a good question. But I found it funny that they use chatter : /. It's like some artifact of like, some old chatter Android app. So
yeah, it's still chat. So it's the same chat registration. I've got a logo that still says chat.
Nice. So they definitely started from that app as their foundation. So anyways, that's how I open up in Salesforce 1 this quote. And then approve and reject, what I'm doing is now I'm making a REST API call over to Salesforce. And this part got a little bit nasty because a lot of the Android SDK has a REST API interface that makes it easy to make REST calls, but for some reason it didn't have the process approvals REST API stuff in it, so I had to manually create that REST stuff and put the right things in there, and then call that. So then I assemble my REST request, and then I make the request, and that's what does the approve or reject. So pretty simple. Cool. And that's all the code for the quote discount approvals app. So that's the basics of wearables. Questions on any of that code?
Yeah. And for you guys on the phone, if you guys have any questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll have James answer those. There are some questions you might go to the chat. Cool. Any questions in the room?
Oh, question is it, apart from the approval process, is it possible to send any push notifications? Yeah, so I used an approval process. Actually, I used a trigger to create an approval process and send a push notification. But you can definitely call the push notification API anytime you want on Apex and however you want. So totally up to you how you use the new push notification API. So that's because that's summer 14. You have to know someone to be able to get access to it now, I think is how it works. I knew someone, so I got early access. I think if you're an actual paying customer, you can contact support and they'll enable it for you. If you're not a paying customer, it turns out you're just SOL. You can't try it until summer 14, which is like 5 days away, right? We ship on summer solstice, right? Oh yeah. I'm new to Salesforce, so I don't know. Right? Probably more like the last day of summer, but as usual, software shipments go. Okay. So anyways, to get that new mobile push API or mobile push stuff enabled on your account, you do have to get a flag or early access to summer 14 or whatever. Yeah.
So this is proof of concept. I understand that. It's great. I love it. How would you see this in production? It needs to be a native app. Is that true?
Yeah, so it has to be native. The reason why is that I'm using some new APIs on Android that are not available outside of the native APIs. So like you can't do this through JavaScript today. By default, at least on the emulators that I've been using, any notification on my phone also pops up on my watch. So maybe not any of them. There's some flag, because I know I see the Salesforce 1 notifications on my watch without doing anything. So I think there's going to be some defaults that they have where some or all notifications are going to pop up on the watch. But for this app, to make this whole thing work, I did have to create my own native application, Android application. So I used the Salesforce Android SDK. That made it a whole lot easier. But yeah, it has to be a custom app at this point.
Does that mean then that I'll need to create a custom app that runs alongside Salesforce 1, which is kind of a generic notification handler, if there needs to be a response to that? So we're saying if it's just notifications, fine, they hit, but if you want somebody to take action,
for both, you would need a custom app on the phone. So even to receive notifications, you have to have some application that's just sitting there waiting for the push message to then turn it into an actual display notification.
So that's not going to be provided by the Salesforce 1 app.
It may or may not be. I'm not sure what their plans are for Salesforce 1. Salesforce 1 already does have push notifications in it. It's just that they may show up on the watch, and they may allow the user to do what the user wants in that context on the watch. So hopefully a lot of that stuff is just out of the box. But for stuff that's not provided out of the box, you definitely have to create a custom app that's just like, hey, I don't do anything except for be this bridge between your phone and the watch, basically. Okay, let's see. Questions. Is push notification similar to using streaming API, or is it different? It's different. So a whole new API. Okay. So yeah. Any other questions about anything? John's ready for more beer. I guess I've been hoarding all the food and beer. So.
Pizza.
All right. Oh, and we have pizza. All right. Thanks everyone. I'll be around if you have other questions.
All right, guys. Thanks for coming. Guys on the phone, thank you for participating. We will post this recording out so you guys are available in the meetup group. If you guys have any questions, you can comment there. Thank you so much, James, for coming and sharing. Very much appreciate it. So, pizza and beer time, guys. What's that?
Thanks everyone for coming along, because we know this was a short notice one. We had some meetups recently, so it's probably a little bit of a meetup team. Thanks very much for making the effort. Thanks very much to Imperio for hosting this at such short notice.
Yeah.
And we are hiring, so anyone wants a job.
See you all next week.
All right. Bye, guys. Cheers.